So however you all need to join us, you can video in or call in via phone. And when we do get to discussion points, which we will try to break throughout our presentation so that if you have any thoughts or questions, and we'll be able to capture those. So you can either raise your hand through Teams. You'll see that up kind of on the upper right hand portion of your screen, or you can type a comment into the chat, and then we can read that aloud and answer it for you that way. So once again, the study team from Connecticut DOT, Mike Calabrese is the Division Chief of Highway Design. Neil Patel is the Principal Engineer of the Major Highways Unit. Again, I'm the Project Manager, and Joe Belrose is the Project Engineer. The folks you'll be hearing from today, you'll be hearing from me, obviously, and then Emily Valentino, who's the Project Manager from Stantec, who is the prime consultant that's leading the study. We also have Andy Lassard, who's a bridge engineer for Stantec, Mike Pywanski, who's an environmental planner, and then Marcy Miller, who is the community engagement lead for FHI Studio. She's running the PowerPoint for us. So I will take this time to have folks introduce themselves, if you don't mind unmuting yourself and saying hi and which organization you represent. I think the way I'm going to do it, just to try to keep this orderly, I think I'm just going to call on folks that I see in my participants pane here. So I'm going to go out of order from what we see here. But Angelo, if you could.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Angelo from People Friendly Stanford.
Thank you. Luke?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Luke Buttenwieser. I'm the Transportation Planner for the City of Stanford Transportation, Traffic, and Parking Department.
Next, we have David Corus.
Hey, everyone. David Corus, President of Stanford Downtown.
Jennifer Young from Charter.
Hi, good afternoon. Jennifer Young, Charter Communications. I run government affairs for the company here in Connecticut. We also have somebody else from Charter on. I'll Chelko Kuzmanov, if you want to let him introduce himself as well.
Sure, thanks.
Yeah, I'm Chelko Kuzmanov, just Charter Communications, and I'm the Senior Director of Corporate Services here in Stanford.
Thank you. Next, we have Judy Norinsky.
Hi, Judy Norinsky. I'm president of Historic Neighborhood Preservation in Stanford.
Lyle?
Yeah, hi, Lyle Fischel, Cove Neighborhood Association president.
Mark Schneider?
Hi, Mark Schneider. I'm representing the Glenbrook Neighborhood Association.
Next, we have Mike.
Hi, I'm Mike Stake, Vice President of Capital Planning for the Mill River Park Collaborative.
Jennifer Orlikoff.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jennifer Orlikoff, Campus Director here at UConn Stanford. And with me, I also have Eris. Eris, do you want to say hi?
Hey, everyone. How you doing? Eris Ristout, Director of Operations, UConn Stanford.
Frank Batiste.
Hi, everyone. I'm Frank Batiste. I'm the Bureau Chief of Transportation, Traffic, and Parking for the City of Stanford.
Terry Adams. Oh, I think you're on mute there, Terry. Sorry, Terry, you're still muted. Should be up in the upper right corner of your screen. think we're having some technical difficulties there. Sorry, Terry. We'll go on maybe if you can. We'll try and circle back at the end. Todd Fontanella.
Hi, Todd Fontanella. I'm a planner with the Western Connecticut Council of Governments.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, yes, can.
Hi, President of the South End NRZ. Thank you.
Thank you. And last but not least, Zelko.
Yeah, I introduced myself. I'm from Charter Communications.
Oh, yes. Okay.
That's
Sorry about that.
Yeah.
Okay. Is there anybody that I missed? If you could just raise your hand or unmute.
Hi, this is Laura Jordan from Stanford Health, Director of Government and Community Relations.
And I do see Aaron Miller. He might have snuck in there as I was going through.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Aaron from the mayor's office.
Okay, great. Thank you, everybody. And really appreciate this is a good turnout. Okay, so today's agenda, I think we had the welcome and introductions. Well, today we'll be talking about the needs and deficiencies analysis that we've performed of the corridor, and as well as our preliminary purpose and need that we'll be carrying forward to help the design development process. We'll talk about the next steps and study schedule from here on out. We'll have some more discussion. I think there will be some sprinkled throughout the presentation, so you won't have to wait till the end. And then finally we'll adjourn. So just real quickly before we dive in, just wanted to give some update on our activities to date since we last met. We've been holding some pop-up events at areas throughout the city, like the library, trying to raise awareness of our study. We've also met with CT Transit and our Rails division of Rails internally at CTDOT to understand routes and service and ongoing initiatives with transit and rail activities. We've also been meeting with the city, trying to keep tabs on some of the ongoing development in the city, which is obviously a very dynamic place, and some of the study analysis that we'll get into shortly. So with that, I will hand it over to Andy.
All right, yeah, thanks. So just as a reminder, what you see on the screen here is the general project corridor. Strictly speaking, the study that we're looking at is exits 7 to 9, but you can see that the area extends into a little bit further to the west, just because we recognize there are multiple projects going on in the area, so we want to make sure that we're capturing what's going on there with our study. So you may or may not be aware, this project really started off as looking at Bridge 32, which is I-95 over Metro North and Myrtle, and it kind of expanded from there. So it made sense to kind of start from the bridge perspective to see what's going on with the bridges within that corridor. But first we want to do is just quickly go over some terminology with the bridges, just so everybody's on the same page. What you see here is a schematic of a typical bridge. So the first thing is the deck. That's the part of the bridge that you're driving on. Typically, it's made of reinforced concrete. That's the top part of the structure. And then the deck sits on top of what's called the superstructure. And this is typically, at least around here, built of steel or pre-stressed concrete or reinforced concrete. And the superstructure spans over to the substructures, which are the around here. We have usually concrete piers, concrete abutments. You'll see some columns or wall type abutments. And what the substructure distributes the load from the deck and into the superstructure, into the substructure, down into the ground. So that's kind of like the general makeup of the bridges that we're looking at here. So again, just speaking in generalities with bridges, Connecticut DOT inspects bridges generally every 2 years or for condition evaluation. And the bridges are given a rating from 0 to 9. You can see the scale on the right there, ranging from 0 being that the bridge is closed and failed to 9 being in excellent condition. And DOT endeavors to keep bridges in a state of good repair, SOGR there, which means it has a rating of 5 or greater. Anytime a bridge or a component of the bridge, so during the inspections, they're looking at the deck, they're looking at the substructure, they're looking at the superstructure. Anytime any of those elements falls below the fair, rating of 5, then it kind of begins to be programmed for repair or replacement. Basically, need to take some special attention to that particular bridge. There's also another component of the bridge that's non-structural, which is more about the function of the bridge. That relates to the traffic on the bridge, the curb-to-curb width, and number of lanes. And that's also given a similar rating of 0 to 9. So the bridges in the study area, and I'll show you the bridges that we're looking at in a second here, but those generally range overall rating from good to poor. And there are 2 bridges that are rated poor, and I'll talk about those in a minute. But it's important to note these bridges are safe to drive on. It's just that when it gets a rating of poor, it just means that the bridge needs a little bit more attention to make sure we aren't dropping down to the 3, 2, 1, and 0 ratings there. And the department recognizes that, regular maintenance is required on bridges, and sometimes major upgrades are required as well. And that's part of the purpose of this needs and deficiencies analysis, is to take a look at that. So in terms of the study area here, there's a number of bridges throughout this I-95 corridor that either carry I-95 or go over I-95. And I mentioned 2 of the bridges are rated in poor. And that's Bridge 32, which is I-95 over Metro North, and Bridge 36, which is Blatchley over I-95. So on Bridge 32, the deck, the superstructure, and the substructure are currently rated a poor, as well as the deck geometry. And Bridge 36, Blatchley, that's really just a functional issue there, where the deck geometry is rated a 4. Kind of drilling down into some of the actual components. Again, I mentioned Bridge 32 over Metro North, the conditions that are in poor condition there. We'll go to the next slide here. These are just some pictures from the most recent inspection report. And knowing that this bridge has been under construction, or there has been a repair project ongoing for the past year or so, those repair projects are addressing issues as they are coming up. But because of the age of the bridge, this bridge was built in the 50s. It's kind of, they're usually chasing these types of repairs, and at some point it becomes more cost effective than instead of continually patching and doing repairs like this, than to actually come in and do a more wholesale rehabilitation. So in any event, the top pictures there from the superstructure, you can see some rusting going on the beams, and some of the bearings are rusting away. The substructure, you can see some spalled concrete there with some exposed reinforcement as well. And again, I just want to reiterate, these bridges are still safe to drive on. These are just issues that are popping up that are identified during the inspections that we want to address before it does become a more major issue. Bridge 36, this is Blatchley. Again, this is more of a functional issue. Here we've got a couple lanes on there and a very narrow or narrow curb to curb width. This is really a function of the amount of traffic that uses the bridge, the number of lanes, and the curb to curb width, and that becomes rated as a 4. So actually we can stop there for a second if anybody has any questions about the bridges before I move on to the roadway geometry itself. Okay.
I don't see anyone that's raised their hand, so maybe we just move on, Andy?
Yep, we'll keep going here. So the other component of 95 that we were looking is the actual geometry of the highway itself as you're driving on it. So the bridge, the highway was designed in the 50s and built in the 50s to a certain set of design standards. What we did is we took a look at the same alignment with the lens of today's current design standards, and obviously things have changed over time. So what we wanted to do was to identify the issues. If we were to design this new, we want to identify the areas where the main line might be deficient. So we did find a couple areas there. We had some stopping sight distance on the main line and the ramps that was a little bit too short. And I'll go through some more examples of these in a minute, but I just want to give you a list first here. Stopping sight distance on the main line and the ramps. There's some insufficient accel and deceleration lane lengths at the exits. We have narrow shoulder widths, which I'm sure you're aware of as you're driving through there. Not quite as evident as you're driving on it, but maybe if you're on there in a rainstorm, inadequate cross slope. That's the roadway cross slope. We want to have good cross slope on there to promote drainage of the rainwater as it comes down. And then finally, insufficient horizontal length. You've got some tight curves through the corridor there. So in terms of stopping sight distance, this is a picture. You're driving on 95 southbound in the passing lane. You can see you have the median there. You've got the curve there. Basically, given the design speeds and what you can actually see, like with your eye, kind of a straight shot, there isn't an adequate distance there for you to pick up a hazard on a roadway, react to it, and hit your brakes and come to a stop. So that's identified as your stopping sight distance. When it comes to merging acceleration and diverging deceleration lanes, this is a graphic here that kind of shows you what I'm talking about. On the left, you have the merging and acceleration lane. Here, you're trying to get on to the highway, get your car up to speed, and get your car into the lane before that the merging lane ends. Similarly, with the diverging and deceleration lane, you want to be able to get your car off the highway, slow down in enough time to get off the ramp and come to either the stop sign or the stoplight or whatever feature is happening at the end of the ramp. So in terms of this corridor, there are two locations, both related to exit 9. One is the on-ramp from Route 1. You have an insufficient acceleration length. And the other is the off-ramp at exit 9. And this is, again, getting off to Seaside Ave. You have insufficient deceleration length there. Again, I mentioned if you're driving through the corridor here, you know that this has very narrow shoulders, particularly as you get to Bridge 32 over Metro North, particularly at the median. Current standards are for at least a 10-foot shoulder there. So obviously you don't have 10 feet, you have maybe 2 feet at times. So that's a deficiency that was noted as well. And then from that, all of those geometric features really have an effect on how traffic flows through the corridor. And Emily Valentina will talk a little bit about the deficiencies there.
Thank you, Andy. Yeah, so along with the physical deficiencies that Andy just talked about, let's jump into operational deficiencies as it relates to traffic. Before I begin, I will just preface by saying at the last PAC meeting, we heard from this group that you wanted a little bit deeper dive into the data. So we're going to do that today. For about the next 10 or so minutes, I will discuss deficiencies as it relates to traffic on the main line and then on the local roads. And I'll give pauses at key moments to ask for questions or if anybody needs clarifications, but please, by all means, at any time, if you have a question, raise your hand or pop your question into the chat. I would love for this to be an interactive discussion. All right, so travel time. When we drive on the corridor, when it is non-congested and free flow conditions, it takes about 4 minutes to go 3.2 miles from interchange 6 to 9. That's in both directions. Now during the peak hour, both in the morning and the evening, that increases to 16 minutes in the southbound direction in the morning and 10 minutes in the northbound direction in the evening. So speeds drop to about 12 to 19 miles per hour on average. We took our existing traffic data and we put it into a traffic model. We analyzed the data and then the model ranked you can go to the next slide, Marcy. The model ranks the roadway in something called a level of service. So we call that LOS. And that is ranked from LOS A through F. LOS A, B, C, and D, that's all considered acceptable, or so there are no delays or moderate or minimal delays. When we start getting into LOS E and F, that's when it starts to fail, and that would be considered deficient, and there would be significant delays. So we see that a lot in during the peak hours. So what did the model say about our corridor during the morning peak hour in the southbound direction? As you can see with all the red, we are failing along most of the corridor from exit 6 to 9 in the southbound direction. What are some of the reasons for this? You can go back, Marcy. So along with just too many vehicles on the roadway, we have high volume weave area between ramps. I'll get to what that means in a moment. We have closely spaced on ramps, so a lot is happening in a short distance. And then we have downstream congestion. So if there's traffic ahead of you, you can't go anywhere. You're going to be sitting in congestion just by nature. So what does a weave area mean? That is, say you're at point B and you want to get onto the highway. You have to accelerate in your lane. This is noted by the pink arrow, and then merge into the main line. Now, at the same time, vehicles that are on the main line will have to merge off into the deceleration lane, just as Andy mentioned previously. This is the blue arrow. And that's happening in the same area. So naturally, vehicles are going to have to slow down in order to safely maneuver with the vehicles that are doing the opposing movement. So that's what a weave area is. And then you put a lot of vehicles in there, that causes more stopping, more brake lights, more congestion. So I'll show an example here in our study area. Drive with me here. So let's say we are at the 4+ lanes, 3,300 vehicles. We're on the main line, but we want to get off at exit 8. And you'll see there are 1,500 vehicles that want to get off at North State Street. That's almost half of the main line volume that is approaching from exit 9. So we're driving along the corridor. We have 4 lanes. 1,500 people will want to get into that outer lane to get off. At the same time, there are 700 vehicles that get on from interchange 9, from Route 1, and they are going to be merging into the main line. So there's a lot happening, a lot of merging at the same time. And coupled with that, we do have a lane drop. So we have 4 lanes between exits 9 and 8, and then it drops to 3 lanes. So there will be even more merging for vehicles that are accidentally in that rightmost lane, but they don't want to exit 8, they'll have to merge into the main line again. Another reason for the substandard level of service on the main line is closely spaced ramps. So you'll see we have 3 lanes, 2,600 vehicles on the main line. We're at Atlantic, Washington Boulevard, and Greenwich Ave, just kind of orienting ourselves here. So we have 1,000 vehicles getting on from Atlantic Street, and then only 900 feet later, we have another 1,300 vehicles getting on at Washington Boulevard. So we are almost doubling the number of vehicles on the main line in the span of only 900 feet. So today there's no lane addition either. So we have 3 lanes at exit 8, and then we have 3 lanes again past exit 7. However, there is a study ongoing now, and it will add an auxiliary lane between 7 and 6. So that will add a lane where we see on the left-hand side 3 lanes, 4,900 vehicles. There will be 4 lanes in the future, so that will help alleviate traffic. So that was pretty dense. I'm going to stop there and ask if anybody has any questions or needs any clarifications on what I just discussed. Yes, I see Angela's hand.
Hi, good afternoon. Angelo from People Friendly Stamford. That auxiliary lane is not pertaining to this study, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And that's already been, I guess, decided on?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Hi, Dave, of course, I see your hand up.
Hey, I'm wondering with this example in particular, I happen to be doing some observations down on North State recently and concluded that a lot of people that would have gotten on at Atlantic are going on North State and getting on at Washington because the ramp itself was too queued up. Are you able through this study? I'm obviously very concerned about the relationship between the highway and the ramps and the local road network. Are you able to look at that as well? And will this modeling, contemplate what's happening on the local roads because of or in response to highway conditions?
Absolutely, yeah. So this tier of what I'm describing now is mainline, and then any changes that we make to the mainline, we will be analyzing those impacts on the local road network. Yeah, and that's partially why we included so much of the local roadways, so that we make sure that any changes we make doesn't, blow up something half mile away or closer. So yes, to answer your question. Any others before I move on? Alrighty. Northbound direction, evening. What did our traffic model say? We do have pockets here that operate at an acceptable level of service C or D. You'll see that by the yellow. However, there are still areas that are deficient. So level of service E and F for the same exact reasons we saw in the southbound direction in the morning. High volume weave area between ramps, closely spaced on ramps, and then downstream congestion north of exit 9. So we can look at examples of this in the northbound direction. Similarly, we have 900 vehicles getting onto the main line, and then we have 500 that are jockeying to get off. So again, short space, a lot of merging, safe maneuvering. So there will be a lot of stopping vehicles that can create that congestion. We also have closely spaced on-ramps in the northbound direction as well. So we have 900 getting on at Canal, just to orient ourselves, we're at 7 and 8 here. 900 vehicles are getting on from Canal Street and 1,000 shortly after getting on from Elm Street. So that's 1,900 additional vehicles that are getting on in a short amount of time. So that will create congestion. Of course, we did a crash analysis. We discussed this at the last meeting, just of course wanted to bring it up again because they are deficiencies. We looked at 2016 to 21 data, and for the local roads as well. This does not include the most recent crashes that some of you might be aware of. So if you don't see a recent fatality in the data set, don't be alarmed. We are aware of it, but it wasn't in our data set. So we did notice on the main line there are mostly rear end and overtaking crashes, and that shows that it is a lot of, there's congestion that will impact that will show a lot of rear end crashes and overtaking crashes, which is when you move along the side of a vehicle. So that's where the merging and the maneuvering comes in. So there were crashes of that nature. And there were clusters, as you can see, along curves, and then as well as at ramp merges, which there are a lot in our study area. So that's a natural factor there. And there were 4 fatalities on the main line during our study period. I did just break, but please feel free to chime in if you have any other questions. So just to recap what we've looked at so far, we looked at bridge deficiencies, Bridge 32, the impetus of our project. If we're going to make any changes on Bridge 32, that will impact the main line. So we're studying the main line as well. We just looked at those deficiencies. And then Dave, to your point too, any changes we make on the main line, we then want to look at how that will impact the local road. So we'll now go into local road deficiencies, and that is really where this group is going to come in. We want to hear your feedback. We heard it so far at the walkthrough at the last PAC meeting, but nobody knows this area better than you, and you have it. You know, we want to hear your different points of view because you all look at it from a different lens. So what are some? Let's start with the scope. What are we looking at when we look at the local roadway? First, we will be reviewing the existing conditions for transit service, pedestrian, and bicycle. We also will look at vehicular. We will then identify some potential infrastructure improvements to those services. Safety is a big component here, and there will be a layer of safety on everything that we do, mainline and local roadway. We will then evaluate the multimodal project impact. So what will those potential improvements, how will they impact the local roadways? And then we will evaluate how any mainline changes will impact the local roadways. So that's the travel demand impacts. All right. So let's just wanted to reorient ourselves. These are existing conditions. On the left, you see a map of the existing bicycle and pedestrian facilities. On the right side, we have completed bike and ped facilities, we have planned, and we have under construction, along with paved and other. You will notice there are some planned ped and bike happening in Stamford, but that is going to be incorporated into our study. Next, we look at bus service. These are existing stations and routes through the city of Stamford and then out into the suburbs, connecting the city to the suburbs. We did a crash analysis, of course, on the local roadways as well. Talked about this last time, but there are hotspots, which you can see by the darker red circles. There's hotspots along Tresser Boulevard, and 3 intersections almost in succession here. We have Greenwich Ave, we have Washington Boulevard, and at Canal there were 3 fatalities kind of in a row there on Tresser. 4 total fatalities on the local roadways, and predominantly rear end crashes. We heard from the group and we know how important it is, pedestrian and bicycle safety in Stamford. So we wanted to pull that out, really take a deeper dive and a more in-depth analysis of specifically ped and bike crashes. We did find that 34 of the 50 intersections that we analyzed have at least one ped or bike crash. in the 5-year study period. There were 3 fatalities that were ped or bike. And again, clusters and hotspots along Tresser in West Main. Okay, this is where the group comes in. I would love feedback. I want to caveat that this isn't the exhaustive list of deficiencies in the local roadway. These are the main factors that we see as being deficiencies and that we heard from you. But feel free to pop in the chat if you see something or you just want to add a note, you know, don't forget this intersection but here we can get going with number 1, limited connectivity for ped and bike. We'll get into some examples after this, so I'll just run through the list now. Limited connectivity, north to south. Also limited connectivity in bike facilities from east to west, north of I-95. We do have long pedestrian crossings without refuge to wait. We have non-ADA compliant sidewalk and crossing features. Limited lighting under bridges, among other things under bridges, and limited transit amenities. I'll pause here. A lot of information being thrown at you. Is there anything that anyone would like to add to this list? Yes, Dave.
Yeah, the only thing that jumps out to me, I think is a great list and really comprehensive. Just in addition to the lighting under the bridges, lack of buffer in places where there's no on-street parking. And granted, a lot of the times the traffic is slow, but when it's fast, with the narrow sidewalks, particularly under the bridges, you feel pretty vulnerable.
Yep.
And I'll chime in. We have a couple of good pictures coming up in the presentation to show you that.
Awesome.
Hello, this is Phil McGonick.
Hi, Phil.
Hi, sorry for the laryngitis. Quickly, because I can't see the photos or what is being referred to in intersections. I know when I come out of being blind, coming out of the train station on the southbound side, I guess that's South State Street, and we come out to the sidewalk, take that left, and crossing Washington Boulevard, so that we could cross again and go north of Washington Boulevard. It was like going through an Al-Qaeda training camp. Every direction there were cars. There's nowhere to stop, nowhere to stand. Is that part of the redesign that is part of this project? Safe to get to Washington Boulevard and walk north towards the government center.
That is absolutely part of our purview. We'll be looking at safety and ADA access.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. If I can jump in, this is Mark. Is that okay?
Yes. Hi, Mark. Go ahead.
Hi. I put in the chat, but I mentioned the last time, coming into southbound exit 9, there's a no turn on right on red. You have to wait. And the signage getting off the ramp is off to the left rather than to the right. I'd love the sign to be moved over, but then when you turn right onto that special, I don't know what the technical term is, but it's like a ramp, then there's a pedestrian crossing getting onto Cortlandt Ave. There was a fatality there about a year or so ago, pedestrian. And then once you turn the hard right going down Cortlandt Ave, you have a pedestrian light to cross. It's right next to that park at the corner. We call it the dog park. The building that was there was just torn down, and supposedly a branch of the public library is supposed to go there. And it's confusing for a driver, number one. Well, when are you supposed to go? If you see the green light, you're looking to turn right. Maybe you're not watching for a pedestrian because that's coming and you're not expecting it. And finally, you get onto Cortlandt Ave, and all of a sudden there might be this flashing light that somebody has turned on about 50 or so feet down the road. And I'm saying, help me. Not sure where to look. I'm not sure what to do. I can't zoom ahead because somebody's likely to cross on Cortlandt Ave. So I'm not sure this is part of the study, but it would help for somebody to take a look at what can we do to make this a little easier. And I'm not looking for hundreds of thousands of dollars to be spent on this, just some little help for the driver to know where to look and what to watch out for. And my guess is eventually that a possible stoplight might be installed once the public library building is there, but I don't know that for a fact. The city or the state would be better able to comment on that. So I'd be interested in your reactions to that, and what, if it's in part of this project, or if it's not, could it be included in some way?
Good to hear from you again, Mark. I remember we discussed this briefly at our last meeting. Thank you for the details again. That was very helpful. These are the exact kind of comments that we would like to hear. That is in our study area, so we will be taking a look at that, and specifically everything you just mentioned will be looked at further. So thank you for bringing that up.
One other thing with regards to that crosswalk, there was a suggestion from others outside of this group that maybe there could be a raised crosswalk of some kind. I don't know if that's part of a solution or something that's done, but anything that would help me. So if I'm driving or I'm walking, I know what I'm looking for, how to maneuver and manage around that.
Yeah, we will try to make it, or we will make it as safe as possible. And there will be a number of, I call them, they're called countermeasures. So we'll look at there's a whole range of options to make intersections safer. So we'll be analyzing the whole range.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. Hello, I see your hand up.
Chelco. Yeah, this is Chelco from Charter. I was wondering, since there's so many projects going on around the train station, Washington Boulevard, which causes already traffic congestion. Pedestrian traffic is high in that area too, going to the train station or hopping on buses. Then we have office buildings like ours right on Washington Boulevard, where we get over 1,000 cars between 5 and 6 p.m. out the garage, adding to the traffic flow going on 95 in different directions. Is there a coordination of studies going on with other projects, or are we looking at this just project?
Absolutely. Oh no, absolutely. There's coordination. We're just actually, we meet with the STC regularly to make sure that any changes that they're making at the train station are incorporated into our study. And there's slides on it later that can show you, but we've assessed and analyzed all of the planned and proposed projects in Stamford, and we're coordinating with the city to make sure we have the most up-to-date list. So there's definitely coordination going on. Thanks for the question. All right, I will get moving on here. Some examples, a lot of which we just discussed, but we can get into a little more detail. Here is the bridge that we've discussed. Poor lighting, it's even sunny and it looks dark. So we know that lighting is an issue underneath the I-95 overpass. We're on Elm, just to orient ourselves. And ahead of us is North State Street. There is also a sharrow. Well, we'll get to that in a moment. There is a sidewalk, which Dave, you mentioned. It's pretty narrow, and it's only on the left side of the screen. So not great connectivity underneath the bridge, not great lighting. And it is unwelcome for pedestrians. Now we'll look at the connectivity piece on the next slide. I can just talk through it then. There's a sharrow here, the bike, see the bike lane, but it goes under the bridge, but there are no connecting bike lanes on either side along Elm. So north of the overpass and south of the overpass, there are no sharrows. So there's no bike lane just underneath the bridge. So that goes with the limited connectivity. And there were 5 bike and pedestrian crashes at that intersection that you see if you were to move through the street view here at Elm and North State Street. There were 5 ped and bike crashes and 1 fatality during the study period. Now we get into some other deficiencies. I'll first talk about the image that you're looking at. So there are long crosswalks without a pedestrian refuge. So a pedestrian refuge is, say you start crossing and the the hand goes red. So you can't keep crossing because the traffic will be going in front of you. There is no safe space with these long crossings to, you could say, seek refuge. Angela, I see your hand up.
Hi, hello.
Hi.
I'm sorry about this because I'll be, I guess, bringing you back a slide, but I just wanted to ask about, a lot of these roads under the bridge. As you've mentioned, there are a lot of pedestrians using it. There are a lot of people biking using it. And I just wanted to ask, since you mentioned that visibility is an issue, if the study would consider the implementation of protected bike lanes with a physical barrier in between any potential cyclists and drivers. Just because, as you mentioned, it looks very dark. And, this is a wide road with a lot of lanes, very fast moving traffic. I've walked along it plenty of times. It is definitely unwelcoming. And so I just wanted to ask if, I guess, that is a consideration in this study.
Yeah, as mentioned, like we're going to be considering all of the safety options. We haven't started to parse those out yet, but the whole range of safety will be looked at.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay, now we can just quickly talk about the level of service. If you drive in Stamford, you might know this. All these left turns at Elm and Tresser operate below an acceptable level of service. So there's a lot of delay for the left-hand turns. There are vehicles mixing with pedestrians here, and that could be one of the reasons. But yeah, wanted to mention overlay the level of service as well as the deficient pedestrian access for both sides of the coin and as it relates to deficiencies. Take a look at another intersection. We have Washington Boulevard at Tresser. And just like the pedestrian refuge that I mentioned before, there is a pedestrian refuge. However, it is too narrow. It is substandard as it stands right now. And there is a long crosswalk. There was one bicycle or pedestrian fatality at this intersection. And again, the left-hand turns do operate for vehicles below an acceptable level of service.
Emily, if I can just jump in quickly. I know you talked about level of service for highways. I just want to know, I want to just talk a little bit more about the nuances for the level of service for local roads. Just, when you factor in, pedestrians and other kind of movements that you have to deal with on local roads. And those kind of two different levels of service. I think it's just maybe important to kind of just clarify everyone. Yeah,
they're very similar. So the graphic that I showed previously, that was for a freeway segment, but it is ranked by delay. So intersections do have different thresholds for what would be considered A through F, but the type of delay does remain the same. So except, minimal to moderate delay is considered acceptable. Same for an intersection and a main line. And then when there's significant delays on an intersection, that would still be considered substandard. So it's a different thresholds, but similar concept. Thanks for the question. Okay, so we talked about the deficiencies, and I did kind of touch on this because of Zelko, your question. We are coordinating and studying the projects that are ongoing in the study area. So I just wanted to point out kind of what is happening in Stamford. We've been researching these, so we can start our fun animation, Marcy. We have that 6 to 7 auxiliary lane that I mentioned earlier. We have, you can click through these a little bit quicker. Multimodal improvements at the Gateway and North State Street, and improvements are happening all over the city. And we just want to, you can keep clicking through them, Marcy. There's a big emphasis on safety. There's a big emphasis on wayfinding and signalization improvements, and they're happening all over the city of Stamford. So we are looking into these, and we're looking at what the recommendations are under these studies, and we'll be incorporating those into our future recommendations. So that would be our basis before we begin with these improvements already in place. We also have been looking at studies that are either already underway or they were funded but haven't been started yet. So those are safety improvements along Washington Boulevard. We have a pedestrian plaza at Bedford and Forest, another pedestrian promenade at Lower Summer Street. We have Pacific Street Village project south of the main line, East Side Pedestrian Safety Project. So you'll notice safety is a big word that, and there's a big emphasis on safety in Stamford, and we're going to keep that concept going forward. Huge emphasis on safety. So I just wanted to, reiterate again, we are coordinating and studying these projects closely and working with the city of Stamford to make sure we always have the most up-to-date list of what will be implemented in Stamford itself. Any other comments before I hand this over to Mike, who's going to kind of switch directions and talk about our kind of next steps and preliminary purpose and need statements and study vision? There will be more time at the end as well. All right, Mike, please take it away.
All right, thank you, Emily. Again, my name is Michael Paiwanski, and I'm an environmental planner with Stantec. And while Emily and their team have been developing all that important traffic information, we have also been developing a draft preliminary purpose and need. And a purpose and need is really an important, developing a purpose and need is really an important benefit of a Pell study. It's one of the components that positions the project for a seamless transition to the federal environmental review process known as NEPA. But what is a purpose and need? It really is overall provides project justification. It defines the transportation project or problem. It defines a universe of alternatives that are reasonable, prudent, and practical. It guides the alternatives analysis process, and a purpose need must be clear, well justified, specific, and comprehensive. Overall, the purpose need establishes the required parameters for the alternatives development, the evaluation of alternatives, and ultimately the elimination of alternatives. And while it's important to note that other considerations, including costs and environmental impacts, also apply to the evaluation of alternatives. Next, please. The inputs, as this little image shows, the inputs on developing a draft preliminary purpose and need include the transportation deficiencies, as Andy and Emily were describing, overall goals and objectives that we'll discuss next, and this is the important part for you all, is public and agency input. And we're here today for your input, but and there's also a number of ways to provide comment that will be provided at the end of the presentation. Next, please. So it starts with establishing a vision for the project and goals. And the Connecticut DOT, and I'm sorry, I'm gonna read a few of these because the language is important, sort of, and these are all open to your comment if you feel like we should modify the vision and goals or the purpose and need that I'll discuss next. So the Connecticut DOT intends to develop a corridor vision on Interstate 95 between exits 7 and 9 that will address the replacement of the I-95 bridge over the Metro North Railroad and Myrtle Ave, as well as improve the safety, operations, and mobility along I-95 corridor and on the surrounding local roadway network. The larger study goals include improving connectivity and livability within the corridor, enhancing mobility, equity, and economic vitality, and minimizing impacts to both the natural and built environments. Next. So once we had the vision and goals established, we moved on to the preliminary purpose and need. And again, I'm going to read it because sort of each word is important, but these are all available for your comment. So the draft preliminary purpose and need includes increase mobility along a 3.2 mile section of I-95 within the study area between interchanges 7 and 9, and improve the crossing of the I-95 over Metro North Railroad and Myrtle Ave such that the crossing is in a state of good repair. So that is our draft preliminary purpose and need, and all alternatives that we consider for them to be advanced into further analysis and ultimately for one to be selected, it must satisfy the purpose and need of the project. So that's why it is so important. David, do you have a question?
Yeah, a small one and then a bigger one. The small one is just on the prior page.
Yeah.
This is a very nitpicky thing, but it says, I was wondering if there's meant to be a comma between mobility and equity in the goal. Equity of mobility could be the goal, or we could be meaning to say enhance mobility and distinct from that equity. And that was.
No, I think it was meant to be mobility equity.
Okay, good.
Yep.
Yeah, fine. I just wanted to make sure I understood.
No, and I kind of said that a little awkwardly too, so I appreciate your question.
Yeah, no, I got it. Cheers. On the next page, so understanding that this is obviously about 95, the impetus is the bridge replacement. So my guess is we can't go too far into primary purposes related to the local streets. Could there be something though? I think we would be concerned that alternatives could advance through the study that could theoretically degrade quality or create congestion on local roads because that's not a primary purpose. I could understand not probably going as far as I might like that, enhancing intermodality or multimodality on local streets probably wouldn't be a primary purpose of this project. But could there be something that's a primary purpose that says, reduces congestion impact on local roads deriving from 95 or something like that?
Well, you know what? I'm going to address that in the very next slide.
Perfect.
Okay. Anything else? Okay, so in addition to the primary purpose and need, which I said, the selected alternative must satisfy, we have identified 3 sort of other desirable outcomes of the project that Connecticut DOT understands is very important and we'll strive to achieve them. They include increased mobility for all users underneath I-95 and along the local roadway network immediately adjacent to I-95 in the study area, to improve transportation facilities, to provide increased opportunities for transportation choice and ease of use for the local communities, including attention towards traditionally underserved communities. And finally, to reduce impact to local and regional community by minimizing construction, duration, and disruption. So David, I hope that addresses sort of what the points you were making.
To a degree, and I don't want to belabor this, but I have no issue with these. And I can totally understand why these would not be primary purpose. I do fear, though, that if there's not something that is a primary purpose around the relationship between 95 and the local streets, that these become much harder. Because I can imagine a situation, and I think you've all done a phenomenal job thus far around, addressing all these issues. But I could imagine a situation where achieving some of these desirable outcomes calls for adding a bike lane on Elm Street, but we determine that that's impossible because the peak volumes on Elm Street are too high, that we can't have the right-of-way space because there's projected spillover from cars that can't get onto 95. And we could be in a situation where we say, well, you know, it wasn't a primary purpose of this project to reduce the congestion impact from 95 on the local roads. So yeah, we would have liked to have gotten to that desirable outcome, but we can't get there. And I'm being like overly concerned. I think it's just the fact that none of the primary objectives address mitigation of the spillover impact onto local roads is of some concern.
No, that's an excellent comment. And we have actually had a number of conversations about that, more or less that exact issue. And you know, we could speak for an hour about sort of the federal law and how purpose and need has to be very specific to the transportation issue. But I guess I can assure you that, and maybe Condot would want to address this as well, that they're very focused on not just the interstate, but also the local roadway network and improving conditions for all users.
But you could have a scenario with this purpose and need where we address the primary purpose, and part of the way that it's addressed is having more volume on North State Street to act as a reliever for 95.
I think in my experience, and I work with a number of DOTs, they're becoming much more cognizant of sort of the big picture and not just sort of the interstate highway. And John, if you wanted to respond to this as well.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, David, these are really great questions, and I don't want to give a yes or no answer just because it's such a complex system that we're looking at here. That the purpose and need is going to be one part of our screening process, and then we will have multiple tiers of screening that will consider some of these other desirable outcomes in more detail. So if you think of the sieve being the kind of the biggest part of the sieve is going to happen first, and then as we are able to narrow down the alternatives through our alternatives analysis, we can start to rank them and compare them against how they impact the surrounding street network. So, we do have these North and State Street pairs that are flanking the highway. In general, we don't want to offload what should be on the interstate to the surface streets, but just understanding that it's such a complicated network. I really hesitate to give you a solid answer at this point.
And I just wanted to add, when we start modifying ramps on the main line on 95, we have federal regulations that we've got to meet in terms of analyzing what does it do to 95, what does it do to the adjacent local roadway network also. So yeah, no, we're cognizant of that. That's not the intent, but like John said, it is, and all right? We know how it's very complex down there. There's a lot of competing interests and in a very tight built environment. But yeah, it's part of that process as you go through the alternative analysis.
There was another question from Angelo.
Hello again. I just wanted to say that I do really like a lot of what I see on this slide. I sort of echo David's concerns that perhaps since they're not really included in the primary purpose, I do fear a little bit that they'd get neglected. But I also just wanted to ask, because I don't really think I see anything about the environmental consideration of all this. In the state of Connecticut, 40% of greenhouse gas emissions come from transportation. And the Connecticut Department of Transportation right now has a mandate to decrease vehicle miles traveled, right? I think that historically, what a lot of state DOTs have done have just said we need to add more lanes, we need to build more roads, and it's led us to a situation right now where traffic is horrible throughout all of Stamford. But also, I-95 is just a massive source of noise pollution and air pollution, and quite frankly, littering as well. I walk underneath I-95 to get to work, and sometimes people will literally just dump furniture and all sorts of other trash. So I was wondering if perhaps there could be any sort of mention or acknowledgement of the environmental externalities of I-95 thrown into this as well.
I would say that that's a possibility, and we can consider that. But maybe just so you're aware that this process, we're not discussing it today, but this process has involved a pretty extensive look at the existing sort of natural and social environmental resources. And the next phase of this project, as we evaluate alternatives, will each step of the way will evaluate the alternatives' effect on these natural and social environmental resources, so that the environment will not be neglected. And as I did say earlier, from here we go into the review under the National Environmental Policy Act, and that requires a very in-depth consideration of an alternative's impact on the environment, including greenhouse gases now. So that will absolutely occur. We can't proceed without that analysis.
Okay,
I wasn't sure if John wanted to add anything sort of about policy or sort of state procedure.
No, yeah, I think that was a great answer, Mike. Yeah, it's just we don't try to duplicate the language that's already in that that process set out for us with the National Environmental Policy Act and the various laws that we follow through that process.
Okay. Yes, thank you. Just because, I did ask earlier about the auxiliary lane between exit 7 and exit 6 on the west side, which was historically a red line neighborhood with a lot of, communities of color. And it just, my fear would be that we're just going to keep adding more and more auxiliary lanes through people's backyards, just increasing their exposure to air pollution, noise pollution, littering, etc. So just want to make sure that the study is considering those potential impacts.
Those are excellent points, Angelo, and I assure you it does consider impacts to those environmental justice communities.
All right,
Judy, do you?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, there was one more comment from Judy.
Yeah, I have a question. I understand that this may be antithetical to what you're trying to do, which is keep traffic moving. But I was thinking about the fatalities on Tresser Boulevard and the one on Washington Boulevard farther north, obviously, that where the two young restaurant workers were killed. And the solution was a pedestrian bridge over the boulevard, but I'm wondering if any traffic calming measures are incorporated into any of this in your working with the city or whatever.
And maybe I can chime in here, and Luke, you can help me out, or Frank, and talk about the study that the city is doing right now, because there aren't specific recommendations yet, but they're potentially close.
Yeah, no, thank you, Judy. So again, I work for the city of Stamford. I'm in the transportation department. I've been working actually with Marcy and another little division of CONDOT on this more comprehensive road safety audit. I think we mentioned it in this presentation of Washington Boulevard from Hoyt Street, basically to Station Place or 95. That's a comprehensive look at Washington Boulevard from a safety perspective. The plans at a high level do not include any sort of pedestrian bridge, but there is several different recommendations for traffic calming and pedestrian safety, as well as multimodality, enhanced bike infrastructure, enhanced pedestrian infrastructure, throughout the entire corridor there. So we're hoping, and Marcy, to hopefully get that, a final document released in the next few months. And then, the city and the state are committed to moving forward on implementing some of those recommendations from that report. And I think, as mentioned here, like that's also getting looked at in the larger scope of this 95 project as well, too.
Okay, if there's no more questions on that section, next we're going to move on to Marcy, who's going to discuss next steps and the study schedule.
All right. Well, everyone, thank you. We appreciate your patience. I know this has been a good discussion with a lot of Q&A back and forth. We only have a couple slides left, and I'm here to wrap it up. And what I want to talk to you today about is what we are going to do on our end internally and with the public to move forward on this study. So you've heard a lot about existing conditions and some of the deficiencies today. And I hope that answered a lot of your questions. We felt them at the first meeting, so we give you a deeper dive today. What we need to work on next is what we call getting into this universe of alternatives. And this is the big thing. This is anything is possible. This is where we put it on the table and we look at high level solutions. This is what happens if we do nothing. What happens if we build a tunnel? What happens if we just continue to reconstruct this bridge and this highway forever? What will it mean for the city of Stamford and the rest of the traveling public? And we start to evaluate that. Then we move on to a more specific range of alternatives, because some of those things are not going to meet the purpose and need. Some of those things are going to have big red flags. But this study, the purpose of it is to weed some of those early things out so we don't have to do design on them much later in the process and drag it out, 10, 15 years longer than it has to. So again, this range of alternatives, are they meeting the purpose and need that Mike talked about today? And those other desirable outcomes, because things that meet the need of the main line and the needs of the local roads and community, they're double bonuses. We talked about in June at our last meeting about how one of the benefits of PAL was doing agency coordination early on to get their buy-in on this stuff called our purpose and need, which is legally binding. So they're coming in early on now, which is really nice. And this is why it's really important to have your involvement and their involvement, because everyone buys in on what we want to do. So we're getting together package materials for them to keep them in the loop. And then finally, we are working, we have one more PAC meeting, which I'll talk to you about momentarily, but we also want to do a public workshop where we talk about, what can you see? What are the priorities? And that's something that we want to bring to you with the purpose and need, this giant universe of alternatives, and how can we whittle that down to something that makes, more sense to analyze. So that's something that we want to do this year. So I'm going to move into a little bit of our engagement next steps. I mentioned our PAC meeting 3. I'm thinking about that in the next month or so, because this is going to be a kind of piggyback on today's meeting. We just knew that we had more than 1.5 hours of content for you, and we didn't want to bore you to death. So we appreciate your time. Then we have our public workshop where we take all of this information to the public and we start looking at priorities. Continued stakeholder outreach. This is building upon what John already said early in his first slide. Things like meetings with CT Transit, the city of Stamford, just to make sure that we're all communicating. Please check out our website. Our presentation and agenda from today are up there. After the meeting today, I'll remove our login information, and what I'll do is, as we get the meeting summary and the video, those things will go up there. So share that with others, please. And we'll continue to do social media notifications, e-bulletins, especially for important events like the workshop. And if you write to us, and we have the information at the end of this presentation, we will make it a point to respond to you. And that's stuff that we keep tabs on regularly. This is an arrow diagram of where we are, is the dotted line down the center. And you can see a lot of what we talked about, we've already done the like purpose and need, engineering, existing conditions. You see that a lot of that is before the line. We're looking to wrap that stuff up. Our goal is to have a public workshop in Orange right here, you know, at the end of the year, because we want to bring that to the public. We want to have one more meeting with you before we do that to talk about a potential reasonable range of alternatives. And then again, the study commences in about a year and a half. So that's where that stands. And then with that, I'm going to turn it over to John, and he can take any more Q&A. If you have things, you can chat them in. You can raise your hand. Judy, I see your hand is raised, but I'm not sure if you ever lowered it from the last time. So
I don't know how to.
Oh, okay, I will do that for you.
Thanks.
I'll turn it over to John, and then anyone else who wants to speak up. Obviously, this is very communal, so we have about 15, 20 minutes left before I think people stop dropping off.
Marcy, there's another raised hand.
Yeah, it's probably me.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I see Mark has his hand raised.
Right. I put in a number of suggestions in the chat, but I would ask you to consider for the recommendations, what does it mean from the perspective of the user of the road in a car, the user of a road as a pedestrian or a bicyclist, or using public trans? That would help an individual person understand, well, here's what this proposal looks like for you when you are, for example, getting on I-95 at exit 9 southbound. What does that look like when you've got to wait a long distance during peak traffic times? I did put in the chat that sometimes the cars back up on Cortlandt Ave to Hamilton, which is roughly a half a mile or so away. Sometimes it goes further than that. And then in the afternoon, it's similar. I'm not sure if it's getting on I-95 southbound or northbound. Haven't gotten that far because I didn't do the studies like you guys have, and you're so much better at it than I as an amateur. But there's also, I'm sure, impacts getting off 95 southbound or northbound, as well as you've described. And I do recognize that you're focused on some of the exits further down, which are more used, more cars than what I face in Glenbrook, but it's still a need and will be impacted by whatever designs you set up. But I'd urge you to say, here's what it means for me driving on that road as a driver. And then the last I'll mention it, none of this should be thought of as I'm advocating for more cars at the expense of pedestrian, bike, or traffic. And the one example I can give to you, I'm now a retired teacher from the Stanford Public Schools, living in Glenbrook. I've worked at Turner River School, which is on the other side of town, and at Ripwam, which is more center off High Ridge. I did try one time in the summer when school was not in session. What's it like to ride my bike to Ripwam? Well, it was not easy 5 or 10 years ago. Lots of car traffic, cars whizzing by, not a dedicated bike path. If the goal of DOT is to get people out of cars and use other forms, we need to create a way where it's safe to do, as one of the other people has said. And it's not really that safe right now. Maybe it's a dedicated bike lane. Maybe it's something else, don't know, but it is kind of scary to finally get to where you work and you've been through hell and back to say, oh, I got here in one piece. Will I get home in one piece? So I'll leave it at that for your comments.
Great. Yeah, thank you so much for those comments. Yeah, we're definitely looking to identify gaps in bicycle and pedestrian connectivity where those can potentially be filled in. And as you mentioned, the presentation of the Pell study recommendations and how those are shown to the public, we are going to be developing user-friendly graphics as we progress through the study. So that's certainly an important tool that we have to show people kind of the before and after and some of the different renderings of what can be done out here.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you again. Angela, go ahead.
Hi, Angelo again. At the last meeting, I asked about whether the consultants or CTDOT or whoever is in charge of modeling modeled a scenario talking about the traffic impact on I-95 in the event of improved bus or rail service in the Stamford area. Since then, the Connecticut Department of Transportation has announced a new plan to actually decrease Metro North service. I speak on behalf of all of us at People Friendly Stamford and saying that we are vehemently opposed to that. We wrote a letter on it, which we actually sent to the Connecticut Department of Public Transportation, as well as other state, local, and federal officials. And I just wanted to wonder, I just wanted to ask, since I believe this modeling is taking place during the second phase of this work, whether this project is going to model the potential impact on I-95 traffic should the DOT actually decrease rail service. Because I think, as the previous speaker eloquently put it, Mark Schneider, the best way to get cars off the road is to provide meaningful alternatives. And I think a lot of us in this area are alarmed that any decrease in train service will lead to more traffic and more stress on I-95, especially the study area we're talking about.
Great. Yeah, thanks for that question. So yeah, I think when we talked about this last time, there is a tool that we're looking at implementing called scenario planning to kind of get an understanding of how some, I'll call them external to us as the study team factors. Certainly they're within other parts of the Connecticut Department of Transportation, as well as others, how other initiatives might impact the results of our study. So that's something we're still working on, how to incorporate that in a responsible way into this study. But that's a good suggestion. So that's potentially another scenario that we could add, is if the service is decreased and how that might impact the study area as well.
Okay, thank you very much.
Does anybody else have any other thoughts, questions or comments? As always, if you think of something later, feel free to contact us any way you can through our website, or you can send me an email or call the study hotline, as it were. And of course, we will be coming back to you throughout the study. So this isn't the last time. We won't be disappearing to go work in a black box after this.
I appreciate your time and your thought process. Thank you.
Well, thank you all for taking time out of your day. I think we might follow up after. We're planning to have a mix of virtual and in-person events, depending on what the subject matter is and the type of venue that might best accommodate that. So I'm sure as we go forward, we might be asking for your feedback on your thoughts on this format. But again, thank you all for taking the time out of your day to join us.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are we all signing off, I guess?
Well, I'm still on. I just kicked off people who were on the PAC, just in case you wanted to do a recap.
Yeah, can you stop, will you stop recording, please?
Yeah. Dun, dun, dun. Are you using the new Teams?
What do you mean?
There's like a new Teams. Hold on.
I don't think so. Is it better?
All right, hold on. I'm stopping.